80% of India's oil is imported, and out of that, more than 60% comes from one of the most volatile regions in the world, the Middle East. Now imagine the consequences if that lifeline was disrupted due to rising tensions between two key players, Israel and Iran. While the world focuses on the military and political ramifications, India faces a different battle, a battle for energy security. The ongoing hostilities between Israel and Iran could send oil prices skyrocketing, disrupt trade routes, and cripple economies, especially India's, which is heavily reliant on imported energy. Today, we'll break down exactly how this conflict could impact India, and more importantly, how India is preparing for these challenges. India, one of the world's fastest-growing economies, has a rising demand for energy, much of which is sourced from a volatile region. Any disruption in the Middle East's oil supply could spike global oil prices, pushing inflation in India, and straining industries already facing rising costs. With over 60% of its oil imports coming from the region, even a slight escalation in the Israel-Iran conflict could destabilize India's energy security, driving inflation and slowing economic growth. Let's take a quick trip down history lane. The relationship between Israel and Iran has been hostile since 1979, following Iran's Islamic Revolution. Initially, Israel and Iran had strategic cooperation, but that changed dramatically after Iran became a theocratic state and declared Israel an enemy of Islam. Fast forward to today, these tensions have evolved into a full-fledged proxy war, with Iran supporting anti-Israel groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, and Israel launching numerous covert and overt operations targeting Iranian military infrastructure. The situation took a serious turn in October 2024 when Iran launched missile strikes against Israeli targets, sparking international fears of a wider regional war. Israel retaliated with airstrikes on Iranian military sites, pushing both countries closer to an all-out confrontation. But how does the conflict impact India? India has intricate ties with both nations, technology and defense partnerships with Israel, and vital oil imports and trade routes linked to Iran. India's energy security is precariously tied to foreign oil. Of the 80% of oil it imports, a staggering 60% comes from the Middle East. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and until recently, Iran have been crucial suppliers. Before the US sanctions on Iran, Iran accounted for about 10% of India's total crude oil imports. But those numbers don't tell the full story. As one of the world's largest oil importers, India's energy demands are rapidly growing. Urbanization, industrialization, and the rise of a burgeoning middle class mean India's energy consumption will only increase. The International Energy Agency, IEA, projects that India's oil demand will double by 2040, placing even more strain on its import dependence. India has tried to diversify its energy supply chain, tapping into new sources in the US, Russia, and Africa. But the reality is clear. India's growth is still deeply intertwined with the Middle East's oil reserves. Whenever tensions flare in the Middle East, global oil prices surge, and India feels the immediate impact. In 2024 alone, oil prices hit $75 per barrel after Iran's missile strikes on Israel. India, which imports millions of barrels of oil every day, saw its energy costs skyrocket. A spike in oil prices doesn't just affect the cost of fuel. It has a domino effect. Transportation costs go up, which raises the price of goods and services across the economy. From the cost of vegetables to industrial products, everything becomes more expensive, driving inflation higher. What do you think is India's biggest challenge in this scenario? Oil security, diplomatic balance, trade routes. India's challenges aren't limited to oil prices. There's also a delicate diplomatic balancing act. India has long maintained strong relations with both Israel and Iran. Israel is a crucial defense and technology partner, supplying India with advanced missile defense systems, cybersecurity tech, and agricultural innovations. On the other hand, Iran plays an essential role in India's energy security and regional connectivity. Despite US sanctions, India continues to invest in Iran's Chabahar port, a vital gateway for trade with Afghanistan and Central Asia. So, India must tread carefully, ensuring it doesn't alienate either partner. Faced with the growing threat of Middle Eastern instability, India has taken steps to diversify its energy sources. One of the most significant shifts has been its increased reliance on the United States, which has become one of India's largest oil suppliers in recent years. US shale oil has been a game changer for India, providing a stable alternative to Middle Eastern oil. Russia is another key player in India's energy diversification strategy. In 2022, India ramped up its oil imports from Russia, taking advantage of discounted prices amidst Western sanctions on Moscow. But it's not just about diversifying oil supplies. India is also looking to the future. investing heavily in renewable energy projects. With ambitious plans to install 450 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity by 2030, India hopes to reduce its dependency on imported oil. Solar and wind power, as well as advancements in electric vehicles, are part of this long-term energy strategy. The Israel-Iran conflict has far-reaching global consequences. If the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes, were to be blocked or disrupted, oil prices could surge to $100 or more per barrel, triggering a global economic crisis. Countries like the US, China, and Russia are already positioning themselves in the region, each with its own vested interests. India, as a major importer, would be severely affected. Rising oil prices would increase its trade deficit, weaken the rupee, and drive inflation higher, all while putting immense pressure on the government to keep energy costs low for its citizens. This scenario underscores just how vulnerable India is to external shocks in the global oil market. India's diplomatic maneuvering extends beyond just oil imports. India has historically navigated its foreign policy with a pragmatic approach, particularly when it comes to sanctions on Iran. Even under intense pressure from the US to reduce its reliance on Iranian oil, India maintained imports for as long as possible, thanks to waivers it secured under the Trump administration. But with tighter sanctions in place since 2019, India has had to cut down its oil imports from Iran drastically. Still, Iran remains a key partner for India in other areas, such as the development of the Chabahar port, which provides India a crucial foothold in the region and access to Central Asia without having to rely on Pakistan. However, Iran's growing relationship with China and Russia complicates matters for India. As China deepens its ties with Iran, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative, India risks being sidelined in the region. This adds pressure on India to maintain its presence in Iran without alienating key partners like Israel and the US. But it's not just about oil. The Israel-Iran tensions also threaten global trade routes. India, which relies heavily on the sea lanes for trade, would see disruptions in its supply chains. From food imports to industrial goods, this would further exacerbate inflationary pressures domestically, driving up the cost of living for millions of Indians. Other global powers, particularly the US, Russia, and China, would also be deeply affected. The US remains a key player in the Middle East and has a vested interest in maintaining the free flow of oil through the region. Russia, on the other hand, could benefit from rising oil prices, as it remains one of the world's largest oil producers. China, with its growing energy demands, is heavily invested in maintaining stability in the Middle East, given its own dependence on oil from the region. With so many major players involved, the Israel-Iran tensions have the potential to spark broader conflicts or force significant shifts in global alliances. For India, navigating this complex geopolitical landscape will require careful diplomacy, especially as it balances its relationships with Israel, Iran, and the broader international community. In summary, India finds itself in a precarious position. The Israel-Iran conflict threatens not just regional stability but also India's economic future. With its energy security at risk, rising oil prices could destabilize an economy that's already grappling with inflation and high energy demands. But India isn't without options. From diversifying its energy sources to pursuing renewable energy projects, India is taking proactive steps to secure its future. And on the diplomatic front, India continues to balance its relationships with Israel, Iran, and other global powers, all while maintaining its strategic interests in the region. So what do you think? Should India prioritize its energy relationship with Iran, strengthen its defense ties with Israel, or push harder for renewable energy independence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Think Pioneer for more deep dives into global economic and geopolitical issues. Stay tuned for our upcoming content.